Everybody, welcome to Keeping It Real. I'm Jay, just coming in to make another video for you today. I wanted to talk to you about our organization and organizational structures and how they're designed to make us fail. The typical board structure that these Métis organizations are using today is simply designed on the most colonial concept in the colonial structures, dating back to the time of the Caesars and the kings of Europe. And so I brought my special red pen and my doodle paper to draw you some circles. And I want to show you today why this isn't going to work. So hopefully you can see this. So in this circle we have traditional board structure. You can see at the top this is your community right here. This forms up the collective of your organization. Could be the community you live in, could be your country, could be whatever the group of people is, could be your clan. Anytime they appoint a head person, this causes division. You see, people from this group here have to compete for this position. That doesn't build unity, that builds division. So this person here is elected by the popular vote, which means that this person here could be in power, this position of power, with as little as 30 or 40% of the collective support. Now, like any good kingship system, you have to have an heir, or the vice chair, or whatever you wish to call them. Because if something happens to the king, well, someone else needs to be in charge, so we need to know who that is. And then to help with the administrational structure of your organization, they appoint other positions like the secretary, the treasurer, the cultural administrator, or any other board positions they want to create a cabinet of people in power who act on what is called the best interest of the people. Only all of these people are only in these positions because they competed to get there. Therefore, they only represent the people that put them there, which is maybe 40% of the collective whole of that community or organization. Well, that isn't a very inclusive way to work. It doesn't represent the bulk of the majority of the people. And it definitely doesn't represent all of them. This system will never represent all of the people. It will only, at a very best, represent about a little over 50%, unless you had a staggering change-up, of which 80% or 90% of the people voted for the person in charge. That's highly flawed. How can we hope to achieve unity in our communities? How can we hope to find a new way forward and an inclusive way forward if we adopt a model of which we do nothing more than to compete to see who's going to be on the top, and we compete to see who's going to fill these other positions? Hopefully these people think alike and have the same goals so they can achieve the same things, but even at best, they'll only represent part of this group. Part of this group will always be excluded. Part of these voices will always be oppressed, and part of the voices here will never be heard because they aren't part of the collective here. This is a highly problematic system and has never worked. If we look back through all of history and all of time, when this was the Caesar, these people often killed this person. If it was the king and this was his heir, how many times do we see where the heir assassinates the king to become the king? It is a competitive, divisive structure by nature. And so, as an organization, as Métis people looking to these kinds of things, how can we look to this kind of organizational structure as a way forward to build community relationships from one community to the next and from one person to the next, to make sure that everyone has a chance to have their voice heard, their opinions heard? This simply doesn't allow for that. At best, this person here will only ever represent a little more than 50%, but if we see how Métis organizations work, they're abysmal in their voting turnout and their voting systems. And if you look at the government and its colonial system, this person here will at best represent about 30 or 40% of the population. Therefore, this structure will only ever represent the minority who then oppress the majority. That's not a good system. What we should be looking at is a system like this, where there's a community of people that represents and appoints a person and another person and all kinds of people to represent their communities. So if this was, let's say, all the Métis people right here, each Métis community could appoint a person to represent their community and represent another community, and so on. then all these community members would just be a community, another layer of government, but they would all be equal in the circle. No one of these representatives would have more power or influence than any other community, for all Métis communities would be equal. These members would then be forced to build in consensus, each one accountable to the other, each one in the same position of power, so there's no hierarchy to go through, there's no person in the middle. There's only the collective pie of building bridges, of finding the common ground. And that is really the kind of system we should be adopting. We should be adopting a system where everybody has a voice. Everybody's voice is heard. This kind of government, however, though, takes a lot longer to get done because you have to build consensus. You have to work together to build these bridges. Everybody's piece has to fit before you have a pie. And that's very different to this system over here. You see, we like this system in some ways because it's very quick, very decisive. But lots of times we see in our modern societies, we move too fast. We make too many knee-jerk reactions and actions on our governmental systems. So while this is a quick system and an easy system to make things happen, it's also an unaccountable system to the people who put it there. Whereas this system might move slower and require more conversation, more respect, and more inclusiveness from the grassroots communities, we'll find that the decisions that are made here are more stable and long-term compared to this system. Because this system is not competitive, and this system allows us to maintain leadership as the community sees fit, the overall stability of the pie is maintained. You see, if this community leader for some reason is no longer there and representing the community and a new person is there, the rest of the pie is still there till this new person builds those bridges and those relationships to restore the circle. This system doesn't allow for that, especially when you talk about a 4-year life cycle of which every one of these people every 4 years could be replaced, which means this part of the circle every 4 years, a different part of this circle of people could be represented with different desires, different goals, and different priorities. So this becomes an ever-changing model of instability, where every 4 years everything is radically altered, where this system provides long-term stability and a long-term vision of consensus building. It's a slower moving, decision-based process, whereas this is very quick, but that quickness is not beneficial. And so that's what I wanted to talk to you today. If you're part of an organization who uses this structure, with a top-down, competitive, minority-driven organization, compared to the traditional, inclusive, bridge-building organization, you need to ask yourself, how can it ever benefit your community or your people? It simply can't. You're competing to see who's going to be on the top. Instead of competing to see how you build bridges and how your community can work with other communities to make a stronger Métis people and a true self-governing, independent Métis nation. This structure doesn't work. It never has. It didn't work for Caesar. It hasn't worked for any of the kings, and it hasn't worked for the people who use this system. Look at the instability in the colonial structures today that use this competitive model for a leadership guide compared to the inclusiveness of having every voice from the grassroots represented by their community leaders. That's what I wanted to come in and talk to you today about, is that we need to find a new way forward. We need to talk about how we let our communities be represented, how you let the community voices be heard, in an inclusive, ongoing way that builds bridges. So I hope to hear your comments. Hit the subscribe button. By all means, please share the video. And make sure you check out our podcast on Podbean, and as always, Facebook as well. So I look forward to hearing from you. Until next time, keep it real.